From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Hi there, welcome to the show. It's a kind of a special edition of Chicago Newsroom today. It's a topic that comes up here pretty often on the show, the enigma that is our Governor Pat Quinn. His popularity ratings are low. You've heard the whole story. Some people say he's the least popular governor in the United States, but there may be a reason for that. You know, he did inherit one of the most fiscally messed up states in the Union, and that's part of the enigma. His official popularity might be low, but many Illinoisans see him as a man of personal integrity, and didn't we need that after the administration that preceded him? He's a Democrat through and through, but he doesn't sound like a Democrat sometimes when he talks about the possibility of having to cut back on pension benefits. And then there's education. There's so little money left in the coffers that the governor has proposed cutting education funding by hundreds of millions, all of that at a time when there's such a need for education improvement in every corner of our state. Oh, and did we mention that the governor also needs to find more money for roads and water, for water systems and health care, and that we've got about $9 billion in unpaid bills, and that Standard & Poor's has given us a very low credit rating. We wanted to get a better understanding of Governor Pat Quinn, so we've invited an expert analyst to the show today to help us understand. Governor Quinn, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here. Yeah,
glad to be talking to you.
Good to see you, Ken. And you know, as you mentioned,
there are challenges.
Yeah, when I became governor, Illinois had a lot of challenges. We've taken them on one at a time. Not only was my predecessor sent to jail, but his predecessor, George Ryan. Both Blagojevich and George Ryan were in jail at the same time, and my job is to clean things up, and we do that every day. I believe in reform. We had, obviously, the Great Recession that occurred as well in our country, so we've had to be coming back from that in terms of jobs and economic development. But one thing with respect to our roads and our bridges and our water systems, our rail systems, building new schools and expanding internet, broadband deployment, we have a robust program doing that, and putting a lot of people to work.
Program.
Yeah. This week, we announced the Stony Island Bridge there coming off the Bishop Ford Expressway, and then there are many other projects, about 202 across the state. And that's what you do when you have a bad recession. You have to have public investment in important things that get us back on the road to recovery, and we got a way to go, but we want to make sure we work hard.
Well, that is actually the kind of thing that I want to talk about here today, because I've really been looking forward to the opportunity to sort of talk to you about philosophy and that sort of thing. I mean, the idea that there are plenty of people in our culture, in our society today, who just would say you're just totally wrong about that. That the role of government should be trimmed, that the government should do less, that the whole austerity movement. And then there's the other wing, which I'm sure you're a part of, that says no. What you got to do is you got to stimulate that economy. You got to find the money to get people out there working, even if they're working on government jobs. You got to get more money flowing in the economy.
Well, we've done that over and over again in the last 4 years. I believe in public works. It makes your economy much stronger. For example, we took care of the lower Wacker. You know, for years needed an improvement, and we made a very large investment, put a lot of people to work, and now that road that goes underneath the central business district of Chicago is a much better and safer road, and we got to keep doing that over and over again. I think it's important that we, for example, have access for everyone when it comes to the internet. Everybody in and nobody left out. So we've laid over 4,100 miles of fiber across our state to make sure there's no underserved communities when it comes to broadband deployment and high-speed internet. And we have work to do there, but if you don't start, you'll never get to the finish line. That's part of the battle right now. Now, you were mentioning about Springfield and pension reform.
Yes, I was.
not a easy subject, but for years and years before I arrived, the governors and legislators kind of ignored this issue. They didn't pay the pension amount every year, or they underpaid. And but basically, I arrive and they have these huge bills. Our state now has to put over $6 billion a year into the pension account for retired government employees. And I want to make sure all of those employees get a fair and decent pension. They worked hard for that. But having said that, if we don't reform the system, then it just won't go forward properly and have the pensions that people need. And it also takes away money from very important things like schools,
well, absolutely,
and health care, and public safety.
And all those things get in line behind pensions. So the question that I really wanted to ask you about pensions is what I follow this stuff fairly closely, and I must say I'm not clear on what your vision is of what pension reform is. We've seen three different things go through the legislature. There's one in the House, there's one in the Senate, and they all kind of tackle it a little bit differently. But I think there are people who've been critical of you and saying, "I want to see what are you putting on the table? How would you?"
I started again.
You know what? I know you did. I know you did.
In April of last year,
I want to read you something. I want to read you something.
I laid out the plan.
I want to read you something from Pat Quinn's budget address. Okay, you said, and I thought this was so intriguing. You said, "If I could issue an executive order to resolve the pension crisis, I would."
Yes.
And I would have done it a long time ago. But democracy requires action by the executive branch and the legislative branch, and it's for you to legislate. So take the vote, send me a comprehensive bill. If you could issue that executive order, what would you do to the existing situation with pensions? Would you cut the? Would you, for example, just to take one thing, would you reduce or back off on the eligibility age? Would you make it 67?
Well, retirement age is an issue. You can make some modest changes there that are taken over time. You don't do it all at once. You might be able to. For younger people today, you might have a little bit later retirement age when it's time for them to retire.
Phase it in. Then.
Yeah, that phased in. That's a idea that I think gets a lot of support. Another one is to have a limit on how much money can be, they call it pensionable. Social Security says it's about $113,000, and I think that's something that we'll do in Illinois. It's an idea I support. Another idea has to do with the cost of living adjustment. The basic pension amount, I don't think anyone should touch, but the cost of living adjustment should be accurate. And right now in Illinois, it's above the cost of living, and it's ended up with the situation our state has nearly $100 billion in pension liability. So we have to make some improvements and refinements there.
It's the compounding of those.
Yeah, that's a problem.
The
compounding.
Really, yeah.
Now, another thing is, I think you should write into the law that the state can never again have holidays. Previous governors to me, both Democrat and Republican, would not pay or skip. And so I think the law should say no more of that. That's prescription for disaster.
Is that possible? Can you write a law that tells the future what they have to do?
Well, I think you should make it very clear what the consequences are if they even think about violating that law. So those are kind of the reforms that make up a pension reform. Last week down in Springfield, the House of Representatives voted on something that I think is a good proposal.
And is it Cullerton's?
No, it was Elaine Neckritz, who was a representative, and Tom Cross, who's a Republican representative. They had a bill that got 66 votes, 6 more than 60 necessary for a majority, and it had 41 Democrats, 25 Republicans, so it was bipartisan. And that's really how we have to do this. This is extremely difficult. It will, however, make our state economy stronger, our state budget better. We'll have more money if we reform the pension system to invest in schools. I want to make it clear, I don't take any happiness in having our education budget for classrooms be reduced. I want to increase that money. As a matter of fact, I said in the budget address, we're maintaining and protecting our investment in early childhood education, because that is the best investment government can ever make. But until we reform the pensions, we're going to continue to have this squeezing that will affect our education budget and also our health care and our public safety. We just lost a heroic state policeman last night on the highways of Illinois. And we have men and women who answer the call to duty, who go forward in the face of danger. And we have to make sure they are properly trained and paid, and that's part of public safety.
There's something I want you to address, though, when we talk about pensions. There's you may know Fred Klonsky, who's a sort of prominent blogger who has a hat that he sells that's, it says, my pension is a contract. Essentially what a lot of teachers and a lot of public service people, firemen and all the rest of the people that I think you and I both think are heroes, they say, I essentially signed a contract with the state of Illinois and I put my money in and you guys didn't. and now you're coming back at me and telling me you want me to give back something.
Well, that's not me. Since I've been governor,
when I said you guys, I'm talking about.
I think the record should show. Since I've been governor, every year I've paid the proper amount.
That's that's absolutely
if
correct.
we had that happen by previous governors, we'd have $5 billion more to invest in schools now.
And going back quite a few governors, by the way.
And our police and firemen, they are in local pension systems, and we're not dealing with that right this minute. We're dealing with the state employees and also the teachers and university people who are teachers in suburban and downstate locations. And so we have to do this right. We have to be fair to those who have worked for and have paid in, so they're not given any kind of unfairness. But having said that, you have to reform the system. If you don't reform the system, there won't be pensions for anybody, and so it's threading the needle and doing it in a fair and balanced way for the folks who have worked hard. At the same time, the taxpayers can't have a system that's needing fundamental reform ignored. So my job is to get that done. I think we can do it in the next couple of months with the legislature in a bipartisan way.
You said before we went on that you're optimistic.
Oh yeah, I think this year a lot of the legislators ran in the last campaign on pension reform. The message is getting out that this needs to be done so we can move forward in Illinois. Our most important priority is to make sure we have a growing economy. We won't have a full-fledged growing economy until we do pension reform.
So can you assure people who have been teaching for 30 or 40 years and are just approaching their pension now that you do not want to take away any of the things that they believe they were entitled to by contract with the state of Illinois?
The basic amount of the pension is going to be protected. I said that in our budget address, and we're going to put more resources into doing that to make sure the state does live up to its obligation. But the cost of living adjustment, that's a little different than the basic pension amount, and we want to make sure that cost of living adjustment is accurate, and it cannot be put together in such a way that it causes the whole system to be underwater, and so that's really the challenge right now.
I never understood the issue that's in front of all of you now about the health care piece, that some of the legislation says, well, you can swap getting state health care for part of the COLA or all of the COLA, and there's many varieties of this. Was the access to state health care ever actually a part of that deal? I mean, did teachers have the right to expect that they would get that?
No, that isn't actually the law of our state now. There's no automatic access to the state employees' health care system when you retire. Now the system is set up where there'll be a copay of some kind that's going to be set up very shortly by administrative rule, because that's another area of state government where you have to take a look at the expenditures, and unlike other states, we didn't have any kind of copay for those who are covered under the system, and we can't afford that anymore. We can't afford a system where people get 100% of their retirement health care paid for by all the taxpayers. So we're working on that one. I had to negotiate the contract with the state employees union, the government employees union. It took us 15 months, but we came to a meeting of the minds and came to a contract, and we're going forward. Part of my job is to repair a lot of damage. We had a lot of damage in Illinois by governors who were in jail and folks who didn't pay attention. And so my job is to clean it up, and I'm not afraid to do that.
And are you prepared to, as some people have suggested, essentially lose the constituency of organized labor, that they'll no longer support you? I mean, I don't really want to talk about politics today. I want to talk about policy. But there is the political issue that you are about to run again, and this is a central constituency for a Democratic governor, and they may just not want to talk to you anymore.
No, that isn't true. Working people, I think, support me. I'm for raising the minimum wage. I think it's very necessary. I fought very hard to have a lot of public works projects that employ men and women of labor. For example, when I became governor, Chrysler in Belvedere, Illinois, had 200 workers at their auto plant, one of the biggest auto plants in the whole world. Only 200 workers. and now they have 4,500. I work with the United Auto Workers and with Chrysler and with Ford. Ford has an auto plant south side of Chicago going full tilt, 3 shifts. They only had 1 shift when I became governor. And same way with Mitsubishi down in Bloomington Normal. So I know how to work with labor unions and businesses on getting our economy back on track. That's really, I think, our biggest challenge in the private sector, to help the businesses of Illinois get off this recession and move forward to a more full employment economy.
We could certainly spend the rest of this half hour just talking about this topic, but I'm just going to artificially call time and move on, because we have so much to cover, and I'm very grateful for your time being here today. In the budget address, or I should say not so much in the budget address, but in the on the website, referring to the budget, on the website of the Illinois Department of Corrections, it says that the Department of Corrections has been in the department's custody for 47% of the offenders who are released from IDOC have been in the department's custody for 6 months or less, and that these are their words, it's the agency's belief that these mostly low-level nonviolent offenders can be punished in less expensive community programs. Do you agree with that?
We're doing that right now. Matter of fact, we passed the law this past year, I signed it into law, on sentencing policy reform. For folks who have committed a crime and have to pay a consequence, we want to make sure that if it's a nonviolent crime, not as serious as some hardcore criminals have committed crimes that are very dangerous, that we really don't treat everybody in a manner that just throws all the folks into state prison together. We think there can be other ways of punishment for nonviolent offenders. We're executing that program right now. We work a lot with folks who have these alternative sentencing programs. It's a big endeavor. It's going to take a little while to implement it, but I want to make sure that our state prisons are there to incarcerate hardcore prisoners who have committed grievous offenses that jeopardize the public safety. For those who have committed less serious offenses, there may be other alternative punishments, but not
at the community level.
Yeah, it's very expensive to go to a state prison. I had to close a state prison called TAMS this past year. It's down in deep southern Illinois near Cairo, Illinois, and it was a supermax prison. It was only half full. It's very, very expensive. It costs 3 times as much to incarcerate a person there, and we decided that that was not in the best interest of the taxpayers. There were folks, you mentioned the unions and such, that were not happy with this decision, but it was necessary for the taxpayers. We had another facility in Murfreesboro, Illinois, that literally had no juvenile offenders, and that was a juvenile. The union there wanted to keep it open, but we closed that and consolidated things in a town called Harrisburg. And so you have to make tough decisions as governor that are best for the public interest, and sometimes you upset people who are not happy with your decision. But
well, that goes with the job. But the population in the Department of Corrections right now, as I understand it, is the highest it's ever been, right? Or it's historic highs. It's 49,000
well, a number of
inmates
the
or something.
Officials want to send people to prison,
and
public safety is definitely necessary in our state, absolutely necessary.
But every time there's a new social issue, like now we're hearing people, the police commissioner in Chicago wants to see more people sent to prison for gun violations. An admirable position, but then you get stuck with the issue of how are we going to pay for or house all of these extra people that, and really, is it socially appropriate for lots of nonviolent people to be in prison? And that's
when you have a gun, that's a serious matter. And we have an epidemic of violence going on, particularly here in Chicago. I live in the west side of Chicago in the neighborhood of Austin, and my mom and dad were born and grew up in Englewood. And so first and foremost, the job of government is to protect the people, and I understand that, and we use our Department of Corrections, our state police, to carry out that mission. We had to deploy our state police, frankly, every weekend in East St. Louis, Illinois. I used to live in East St. Louis many years ago. And every weekend, and sometimes even more often, our state police are there helping local law enforcement. I think this is very, very important. Now, I believe in gun safety, and I think that means we need to reform our laws. We have to ban assault weapons, also high-capacity ammunition magazines that go with those weapons. I was really the first person to talk about that last summer, and after the tragedy in Aurora, Colorado, we lost a young sailor from Illinois, John Larimer, who was in the movie theater when that gunman came in with an assault weapon and a high-capacity ammunition magazine, and he mowed down and killed 12 people, wounded 70 others, and one of those killed was John Larimer, who put his body in front of his girlfriend and saved her life. And after that happened, I amended a bill to try and ban assault weapons, ban these high-capacity ammunition magazines, and we're going to keep fighting on that till we get it done.
That's going to be a struggle in and of itself.
This year, right now, next couple months.
I did not mean, by the way, to imply that I thought that this was an unimportant thing for putting people in prison for gun violations. Of course, I'm just saying that this is one of the challenges you face is that the prison population keeps getting higher and higher. Now, I know you had some little kerfuffle with public radio over the last couple of days about prison issues, but one of the things that they reported on, and I'd really like to get your sense on this, is it really true that there are about 600 men right now who are sleeping on gym floors in prisons around
Well, we
Illinois?
closed the prison in Dwight, Illinois.
That was a women's prison.
A women's prison. We moved the prison. We have actually fewer women prisoners now, and we also have fewer juvenile offenders because we're using alternative sentencing.
That's a good
This
example.
will be occurring across the board for all prisons, but in making that transition, by closing Dwight, which was done without incident, we moved those prisoners to Logan County, a little bit farther down I-55. You know, there's some transition issues of nonviolent, low-level offenders who we're accommodating now. But I think, you know, basically we're going to have our prisons fully staffed for the first time in a long time because I had to close a couple of prisons, and we're now all the workers who worked at these prisons ended up getting a job, another job in the corrections department. Nobody lost their job, but we're redeploying people so that we cover the prisons. We don't have to pay as much overtime, which is very expensive for the taxpayers, and we'll carry out the mission of public safety.
But just to that question, is it true that the prisons are so overcrowded at this moment that you have people sleeping on floors in gymnasiums?
Not on floors. They
have
cots.
They're cots on.
They have cots in the gymnasium, and the director of corrections and the warden have to do what's necessary to preserve order in the prison, preserve safety, and they were able to do that.
So did you act prematurely in closing TAMS? Maybe you could have used that. Maybe you needed that space.
TAMS wasn't accommodating
I know that was
matter of fact, it's a supermax prison. It has a certain structure that doesn't allow for anything like that. We may seek to sell TAMS prison to the federal government or to somebody else. We did that with another prison in Illinois. We sold it to the federal government, and we're using that money, the money we get, to invest in important public policy.
Governor, we're down to our last couple of minutes here. I want to just radically switch topics here. Again, quoting from you, I believe I wrote this, I actually wrote this down when I saw it. You said, speaking in the last couple of days, I really feel that when it comes to education, having served myself on a local school council that was elected by folks from the neighborhood, I think the school board of Chicago should be elected. That is correct. You did say that.
Right, I sure do.
I was a little
believe
surprised to see that, but...
Well, 95% of the school boards in America are elected by the people.
Right.
And I think the Chicago Board of Education, which for years has been appointed, it would serve us well to have an elected school board. Most every other school board in our state of Illinois is elected.
But as you well know, the policy for the last few years, the last 20 years or so in Chicago has been mayoral control, and mayoral control comes from the fact that the mayor appoints the school board.
Well, that's been as long as I've been alive. I think the mayor's appointed. I have nothing against this mayor or previous mayors. I just think as a public policy, when it comes to education, one of the most important missions that adults have for the next generation, to make sure they get a good education, that we should elect the members of the school board. Now, I did serve 1989. I was elected from my community on the west side.
What school?
Sayre School, Sayre Language Academy. I was elected as a community member to be on the local school council for that school. And I thought that was a very healthy exercise. I learned a lot, and the people of the community wanted to have a voice in that particular school. Well, I think the same principle should apply to the entire system. It's a very important mission that all of us have to educate our students to world-class standards.
You're on the opposite side from Mayor Emanuel on this, though. Of course, Mayor Emanuel is obviously opposed.
It's personal.
No, I know, but I mean, but philosophically, you're opposed to. You're on the opposite side on that issue.
Don't you think that if we had an elected school board in Chicago, where I live in the city, more of the issues of education would be debated by folks who are elected by their fellow citizens, and I think that's a healthy process.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking for my opinion doesn't matter, but I do think it's complicated because it does open up the issue of all the different parties then putting lots of money in. You know, the Republicans and the Democrats will start running slates.
I wouldn't have a partisan election of school board members.
Right.
The way it works now in other parts of Illinois, other cities, is it's nonpartisan, and so hopefully elect good people, men and women who are committed to education and students. But these issues get debated better.
Of course they do.
And folks talk about them, go door to door, and
one of the things that the school board is dealing with right now is obviously the closing of the schools. I don't know how you feel about having 50-some schools closed all at one time, and we almost don't have time to even ask you about that. But it goes hand in hand with the issue of the increase in charter schools. I saw you not recently, just recently at the City Club of Chicago introducing Diane Ravitch, who stood up and berated the city of Chicago for building charter schools when it should have been putting money into the regular schools.
She's
right.
written an excellent book. It's called The Death and Life of American Schools.
So because we're down to just a few seconds, talk about charter schools.
Well, I think there's a role for public charter schools. I may or may not totally agree with Diane Ravitch, who's an education expert. At one time, she was all for charter schools.
Yes,
so
I know.
she's kind of changed her mind on that.
That's right.
But I did sign a bill to expand the number of charter schools in Chicago, the suburbs, and downstate. I think there's a role for them, a proper role. They have to be accountable and evaluated just like every other school. And I also believe very fervently in our public school system.
So
and we need to make sure we carry that mission forward, and I work very closely with public school teachers and staff across the state.
So was it a good idea to close all these schools at one time?
I think that has to be done with extreme care, and I would recommend to the school board of Chicago to take this in a very careful manner and not to do anything that's hasty or ill-conceived. And so to try to do it all in a very short period of time, I think is dangerous.
Yeah. Governor, I'm so sorry we're out of time. I hope we'll be able to do this again sometime because I feel like we just scratched the surface on these issues.
I'm glad to be here. I'm not running away. I believe in getting in the middle of the arena and fighting hard.
As somebody who remembers covering you down at the Bismarck on your Sunday afternoon things 30 years ago, I know you never...
This year is the 30th anniversary not only of CAN TV, but also the Citizen Utility Board, our largest consumer group. And I helped start that.
All right. Thank you so much. That's an open invitation. I'll have you back sometime soon.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Governor Quinn, for being with us today on Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV, and you know that you can see us anytime on cable, but you can also look at this address right here, and you can watch the show anytime you want. You can also check out our archive of back shows, too, and you can subscribe on iTunes as a video or an audio podcast. Hope you'll do all those things. I'm Ken Davis thanking you and thanking Governor Quinn for joining us. We'll see you next time on Chicago Newsroom. Take it easy.